The thing that got me first wasn't even the guy. It was how normal his voice sounded. I was standing there with the pump in my hand, engine still idling behind me, that steady little vibration you feel through the soles of your shoes when your car's been running a while, and this guy comes around the side of the building like he'd just stepped out to smoke or something. Not in a rush. Not acting weird. He just looks at me and goes, "Hey man, you got any cash on you? The machine inside's not taking my card." And because that's a completely normal thing to hear at some beat-up gas station off a highway in the middle of nowhere, I looked at him. That was the first mistake. I do a lot of night driving, not for work exactly, just because I bounce between cities a lot to see family, friends, that kind of thing, and if you spend enough time on the road after dark, you start building little habits. Mine is I don't shut the car off for quick stops. If I'm only getting gas or running in for a drink or using the bathroom somewhere that looks half dead, I leave it running. Door unlocked, lights on. In and out. It sounds paranoid when you say it out loud, but it's really just routine to me now, like checking your mirrors before you switch lanes. That night I was a couple hours into a drive I had done before. One of those long highway stretches where every exit looks like it might have one diner, one motel, and a gas station that probably hasn't changed ownership since the 90s. I was getting tired enough that the yellow lines had started doing that hypnotic thing, so when I saw the sign for gas and food, I took it without thinking too much about it. The station sat a little off the road, maybe 50 yards back, with one pump island under a dim canopy and a low cinder block building with a cashier window instead of a proper store entrance on the front. There were lights on, but not enough of them. The kind of place where the fluorescent bulbs have that tired green look. No other customers. No music. Just the buzz from the canopy and the sound of my own engine. There was one other car there, parked off to the side of the building. Dark sedan, older model, backed into the spot. I noticed it because I notice cars at night, especially when there aren't many other things to look at, but it didn't set anything off in my head. Could have been the cashiers, could have been some guy taking a break. I pulled up to the pump closest to the road so I could get back out fast. I remember that because I always do that too. Nose pointed toward the exit. Never back corner if I can help it. I got out, swiped my card, started filling up, and then the guy came around the side asking about cash. He was maybe my age, maybe a little older, hard to tell in that light. Hoodie, ball cap, one of those neutral faces where if you passed him at a grocery store you wouldn't remember him 10 seconds later. He didn't look dirty or frantic or drunk, just ordinary. I said, "No, sorry, I don't really carry cash." He nodded like that made sense. Didn't act annoyed, didn't walk away either. He stood there and kept talking, said, "Yeah, these places are always having some issue with the card reader." Asked if I'd come from north or south on the highway. Said he was trying to get to the next town over. Just little nothing questions. I answered a couple because, again, there wasn't any one thing yet that justified being rude or alarmed, and I'm pretty comfortable by myself. I grew up driving back roads at night. I camp alone. I've slept in my car at trailheads. My brain doesn't jump straight to worst case. If anything, I usually give people too much room before I decide something's wrong. Then I happened to glance past him toward that parked sedan. There was someone in it. Just sitting there behind the windshield, not moving. I hadn't seen them when I pulled up. which probably just meant I hadn't looked closely enough, but once I saw them, I couldn't stop noticing how still they were. No phone glow on their face. No hand on the wheel. No cigarette ember. Just a shape in the driver's seat, angled slightly toward us like they'd been watching the whole time. The guy in the hoodie kept talking. Something about how the town up the road had a truck stop that stayed open all night, and I did that thing where you're nodding at somebody while your brain has already left the conversation and gone somewhere else. I looked back at my pump. Almost done. I remember thinking, okay, finish fueling, put it back, get in the car, leave. No drama. Nothing to see here. Then the guy took one small step closer. It wasn't aggressive enough that I could call it that, not if you asked me to describe it later. But it was closer than people stand if they're just making conversation with a stranger at a gas pump. Close enough that I could smell old cigarette smoke on his hoodie. Close enough that I had to lean back a little to keep the same space between us. I shifted sideways, casual, toward my driver door. He shifted too. That was the moment where the little internal voice finally spoke up. Not loud, just enough to say, pay attention. I told myself there were normal explanations. Maybe he wasn't thinking about where he was standing. Maybe he was one of those guys who crowds people without realizing it. Maybe the person in the sedan was his girlfriend, brother, friend, whoever, waiting on him and staring because they were bored. All possible. All stupidly possible. But when I looked at the sedan again, the person inside slowly pushed their door open. Not all the way. Just enough that the interior light flicked on for a second and then died. Enough that one leg could have come out if they wanted. Enough that I could see the angle of their body had changed toward me. They still didn't get out. The guy by the pump kept talking in that same even tone, like we were both just killing time. He asked me if my card had worked on the first try. Asked me if I knew whether there was another station open farther down. He put one hand in the pocket of his hoodie and looked over at the road for a second, like he had all night. My gas clicked off. That sharp little thunk sounded way too loud. I reached for the nozzle, and he put his hand on the pump handle before I could lift it free. Not grabbing my hand, not attacking me. Just closing his hand over the handle like he was helping. I looked at him and said, "Hey, I got it." He smiled, not big, barely even a smile. At the same time, I heard the sedan door creak wider. I turned my head, and the second person was stepping out now, finally unfolding slowly like they didn't need to hurry, because they already knew where I was going. Toward my car. Not toward me. Toward my open driver's side. I don't think I've ever had a thought arrive that clean in my life. Not even really a thought. More like a full-body decision before my brain had time to put words on it. I let go of the nozzle. Gas splashed onto the side of my car and my shoe. I shoved the guy in the hoodie with both hands as hard as I could. He stumbled back into the pump. I heard the metal bang. Then I cut in front of my own bumper instead of going around the back, because the second person was already too close to the driver door. I hit the seat half sideways, one leg still outside, grabbed the wheel and slammed it into drive. The nozzle was still caught for a second. I felt the tug through the whole car. There was this awful scraping jerk and then a loud crack when it snapped free. The guy by the pump shouted something, I don't remember what. The other person jumped back from my door. I punched the gas so hard the rear tires chirped on the pavement. I was back on the highway before I realized I was still holding my breath, and because adrenaline doesn't make you smart, just fast, I drove maybe 5 miles before it hit me that I had raw gas on the side of the car and probably half down the quarter panel, and I had no idea if that nozzle had damaged anything or if I'd just dragged a live disaster out onto the road with me. So now I had a whole new problem. My hands were shaking hard enough that I kept slipping on my phone when I tried to unlock it. I pulled onto the shoulder under one of those useless little reflector posts, left the car running and got out to look. The smell hit me right away, sharp and chemical, stronger than it had been at the station because now it was all over my hands too. The nozzle was gone. Thank God. The fill door was hanging open and gas had streaked down the side, but nothing was sparking, nothing was leaking out in a steady stream. I stood there listening to my own engine tick and idle, waiting for something else to go wrong. Nothing did. So I got back in and drove to the next actual town, the first place with a fast food place and a 24-hour pharmacy and enough light that you couldn't really hide between buildings. I parked under the brightest sign I could find and called the non-emergency police line for the county I'd just come through. I gave them the station location as best I could, told them what happened. The dispatcher asked if either man had threatened me directly, if I'd seen a weapon if they tried to enter the vehicle. I said no, and not exactly. I could hear while I was saying it how thin it sounded. 2 guys at a gas station acted weird. One stood too close, one walked toward my car. I drove off and damaged a pump. She took the report, but even she sounded like she was filing it under suspicious activity. Maybe attempted theft, maybe just nothing. And I get why. If I heard somebody else tell it cold, I'd probably do the same mental math. Maybe they were trying to panhandle. Maybe they were trying to steal the car. Maybe they were trying to scare me and see if I'd drop my wallet or leave the pump running. There are normal crimes. There are dumb crimes. Most things fall under one of those. What bothers me is how rehearsed it felt. Not in some movie way, in a boring, efficient way. The first guy didn't come at me too fast. He didn't ask for money twice. He didn't get angry when I said no. He kept me talking exactly long enough for me to stay outside the car and let my attention split. The second person didn't rush either. They waited until the angle was right, until the first guy had drifted between me and the driver's door, until I was focused on getting the nozzle back in place. It was clean, too clean for something improvised. I stayed in that town for maybe 40 minutes, bought paper towels and a bottle of windshield cleaner because it was the closest thing I could think of to wipe the gas off the paint. My hands smelled like fuel the whole rest of the drive, no matter how much I scrubbed them in the bathroom sink. I kept expecting to see headlights from that sedan in my mirror. Every pair that came up behind me made my shoulders lock. They never showed. The next morning I called my insurance company, then the station, mostly because I figured if I damaged their pump I'd hear about it one way or another. The station phone rang and then went to a generic voicemail that didn't even say the business name. I tried again later. Same thing. A couple days after that I looked the place up online. There was a listing for it, but barely. No website, no recent reviews. Just an address and an old photo from daylight that somehow made it look even less real than it had at night. I ended up driving that same route again about 2 months later during the day this time, and I thought about taking the exit just to see the place in daylight and prove to myself it was smaller and dumber and more explainable than I remembered. I didn't do it. I kept going, And the part I still get stuck on isn't even that they tried something. People try things. It's the specific shape of it. One person talking, one person waiting, both of them patient enough to let me do what I always do at night, which is trust my own routine. If I'd turned the engine off like a normal person, maybe I would have stayed outside longer. If I'd gone inside first, maybe I would have been away from the car entirely. If I'd topped off the tank like some people do, maybe I'd have been standing there another 20 seconds. They were coordinated enough to block me from the door and move on the car at the same time. I still don't know what they thought was going to happen once I was the only thing left standing between them and an idling vehicle. Story 2. The next one came from a man who spends so many nights on back roads for work that he notices when a place is wrong in ways other people wouldn't. The first thing I wrote down was the mileage. That's what I always do. Odometer, time, location if the sign's visible, then fuel amount once I'm done. My glove box is full of little spiral notebooks with the same cramped handwriting in all of them because if I don't keep a paper log, accounting turns one tank of gas into a 2-week email chain. I've learned that the annoying systems are the systems you respect. That night I had been on rural roads for hours, the kind that narrowed down to 2 lanes with no shoulder and tree lines close enough that your headlights just bounce back at you. No traffic in either direction. No houses for long stretches. Just dark pasture, fence posts, the occasional mailbox appearing out of nowhere and vanishing again. I knew the fuel shack I was heading for because I'd used it before. Not often, maybe 3 or 4 times over the last couple years, but enough to remember the layout. Single pump out front, small office shack attached behind it, payment through a sliding window. Sometimes somebody was there, sometimes you filled up first and settled after. It wasn't unusual. Plenty of little places run like that outside towns where nobody's staffing overnight unless they have to. I pulled in a little after midnight, gravel crunching under the tires, and the whole place looked exactly the way I remembered it except for one thing. The payment window was already open. Not wide, just slid back a few inches. There was a strip of yellow light coming through it onto the counter inside, but no attendant. I noticed it, then didn't think much about it. If anything, I assumed it meant somebody was there and just stepped away from the desk. Bathroom. Back room. Whatever. I parked by the pump, left the driver's door cracked while I jotted the mileage in my notebook, then got out and unscrewed the gas cap. Cold night. Not freezing, but that dry kind of cold that makes your knuckles feel stiff. I remember the smell of dust and diesel hanging around the place even before I started pumping. There was a bug zapper somewhere near the shack, snapping now and then in the dark, and otherwise it was quiet enough that every little mechanical sound stood out. The pump was old but working, numbers ticking up slow. I stood there with my notebook tucked under one arm, pen behind my ear, doing the dumb mental math I always do about whether I should have filled up 40 miles earlier. Nothing felt wrong yet. Just thin. That's the word I'd use for places like that. Thin enough that if something breaks the silence, it breaks all of it. When the tank was full, I put the nozzle back and walked to the window. No one there. I leaned a little closer and said hello. No answer. I knocked on the metal frame with my knuckles, Heard the hollow ring of it then from somewhere deeper in the shack, a quick sound like something being set down. Not dropped, set down. I waited. Another few seconds. Then I said, "Hey." I just filled up. Still no answer. Now there are reasonable versions of that. Somebody stepped into the bathroom, somebody's in the back office doing paperwork. Somebody heard me and is taking their time. It was irritating more than alarming. I remember checking my watch, then glancing back at the road like another vehicle might come along and make me feel less stupid standing there talking to an empty window. Nothing on the road, just my headlights and dark. I knocked again, louder this time. Another sound from inside. Movement. A scrape like a chair leg or shoe sole across linoleum. I actually said, mostly to myself, "All right, that's enough of that," and turned back toward the truck. My thought process was simple. Sit in the cab, give it a minute, then either they come out or I call the posted number and sort it out that way. Mild hassle. End of story. But as I stepped off the little concrete pad by the window, the pump display clicked and reset to 0. I stopped. That's one of those things that hits differently if you've spent years dealing with small procedural nonsense. Pumps don't usually clear themselves while you're standing there staring at them, especially not right after a fill when no receipts printed and no payments gone through. Somebody has to do that either from inside or at the unit itself. I looked back at the shack. Window still open. Same strip of light, no face, no hand. I stood there long enough that the skin between my shoulders tightened. Then I did what I should have done first. I took out my phone and called the number on the weathered sign taped beside the window. It rang once, then stopped. Not voicemail, not disconnected. Just one ring and silence. And from inside the locked shack, maybe 10 feet away from me, I heard a phone start vibrating. Faint, but clear. That rattling little buzz against a hard surface. Once, twice, then done. I lowered my phone and just listened. Nothing. At that point, I had my first real spike of something that wasn't simple annoyance, not fear exactly. More like the sensation you get when a routine stops behaving like a routine and your training doesn't tell you what box to put it in. I walked back to my truck, got in, and locked the door. That was the first partial release because the cab is a cab. Door closed, glass up, keys in hand, familiar smells. Coffee gone stale in the cup holder. Paper receipts in the side pocket. Highlighter cap rolling near the center console. All the normal junk that tells your nervous system you still have some control over the situation. I sat there for maybe a minute with the engine idling and headlights aimed across the pump and shack. No one appeared. I almost drove off. Honestly, I should have. But again, work brain. Process brain. I had taken fuel. I needed a receipt or at least a record of the amount charged. If the station later claimed something different, I'd have nothing. That sounds petty until you've had to justify expenses to people sitting under office lights 2 states away. So I told myself this was inconvenient, not dangerous. I got back out, taking the notebook with me this time, and went to the window again. I wrote the pump amount down from memory while I stood there, just in case. Then I leaned in farther and tried to see more of the interior. Counter. Stacked cigarette cartons on shelves behind. A little desk fan. Bulletin board with faded notices curling at the corners. I could see part of an office chair beyond a doorway, but not much else. The yellow light came from a lamp on the back counter, not the overheads. That was another thing I remembered later. Why just the lamp? I called out again. Said I was with a work vehicle and needed a receipt. Said if somebody was there, I just needed 30 seconds. Movement. Definitely movement. This time from closer. A soft step. Then another. Not hurried. Just enough to let me know someone was in there and could hear me. I felt my own mouth go dry. I took a step back from the window and immediately hated that I'd done it, because now if somebody did appear, I was the one who'd made it awkward. I actually had the thought that maybe they were older, maybe moving slowly, maybe I'd spooked them by banging on the frame. I was still working to explain it down. Then the window slid shut. Slowly. From the inside, no face. No hand I could clearly see. Just the glass panel moving across the opening with that dragging metal sound until it met the frame and clicked. I didn't move for a second. I was staring at my own reflection in the glass now, washed out by the lamp behind me and the truck headlights off to the side. I said hello one more time, and hearing my own voice bounce back off that closed window made the whole place feel suddenly smaller. Then the light inside the shack went out. All of it. Not the lamp only. Everything. The building went black so fast it was like somebody had put a hood over my head. I turned around immediately. Because when you're on a remote roadside and the only lit thing goes dark, you understand in one shot how little there is around you. The truck headlights were still on, but they threw that hard tunnel of light forward, which meant anything just outside it got darker by comparison. The air felt colder right away, though maybe that was just me noticing it more. I heard footsteps then, not from inside the shack. From outside, around the far side of it, gravel, slow, deliberate, coming from behind the building and curving toward where I was standing. I backed to the driver's door, opened it without taking my eyes off the side of the shack, got in and locked it again. My hand slipped once on the handle because my fingers had started losing fine motor control. I remember being annoyed by that. Not scared yet. Annoyed. The footsteps stopped. I hit the high beams, nothing in front of me. Pump, shack, weeds by the ditch, the road beyond. The side of the building on my left was mostly shadow from my angle, but if somebody rounded it into the beams, I would have seen them. No one did. I stayed there, engine running, headlights and high beams on. Foot half on the brake like I might need to lurch forward or backward depending on what happened next. I kept expecting someone to knock on the window and laugh it off. Sorry, had to step away. Sorry, power issue. Sorry, we close early and forgot to lock up. Instead, I got another partial release. A pair of taillights appeared in the distance on the road. Far off at first, then nearer. Just another vehicle, probably a pickup, moving steady through the dark. Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with that place. But the instant I saw it, I felt some part of my chest loosen, because it meant I wasn't the only living person on that road anymore. I could have pulled out right then and probably should have, but I hesitated. Stupidly. I wanted to see if the passing vehicle would prompt someone from the shack to reappear, the way odd behavior sometimes corrects itself the second there's a witness. The other vehicle came level with the fuel shack and kept going. Didn't slow. Didn't stop. For a second I thought about flashing my lights or pulling out in front of it, but that would have looked insane on a dark rural road after midnight. So I waited until it had gotten maybe 100 yards ahead, put the truck in drive, and followed it out. I did not look in my mirrors more than I had to. That was the survival part of it. Not dramatic, no chase, no one pounding on the truck, Just me keeping another stranger's taillights in view like they were a tow rope dragging me back toward the normal world. I followed that vehicle all the way to the next town limit sign before I peeled off into a lit parking lot and stopped. My shirt was damp across the back. I hadn't even realized I'd been sweating. My notebook was still in my hand, bent where I'd gripped it too hard. The ink from the mileage entry had smeared onto the side of my thumb. I sat there with the dome light on and wrote down everything while it was fresh. Time I arrived, gallons, approximate duration before the window shut, sound of phone vibrating inside, lights out, footsteps around building. I wrote it all the way I would write an incident report because that was the only frame I had for it. If I turned it into bullet points, it felt less personal. The next day, in daylight, I checked my card statement. No charge. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. It meant either the fill never processed, or it did and wouldn't settle until later, or somebody manually voided it, or the pump wasn't connected the way it looked. Every answer raised another question. I called the number again from the sign. This time it went straight to a generic voicemail with no business name attached. I left nothing. A week later, I was filing expenses and had to explain the missing receipt and unmatched fuel entry. My manager asked if I wanted to just leave that tank off the reimbursement report. I said yes. It wasn't worth the paperwork. He asked which station it was, and when I told him, he paused for a second like he recognized the name or the location, then just said, "Huh." I asked if he'd heard something about it. He said only that one of the other guys once mentioned the place being odd at night and that he tried not to use it anymore. That was all. No story, no formal complaint, no police report that I know of, just that little passing comment, the kind people make when they don't want to sound dramatic about something they can't explain cleanly. What sticks with me isn't one single moment. It's the way the place kept returning to almost normal and then slipping away again. Open window but no person. Movement but no answer. Pump reset but no attendant. Phone ringing but only inside the locked building. Window closing, lights out, footsteps, then nothing at all when I hit the beams. Every time my brain found a shelf to put it on, the shelf broke. I've driven plenty of lonely roads since then. I've stopped at plenty of stations that looked worse. Most of them are exactly what they appear to be, just understaffed, old, trying to survive out where nothing stays open late unless it has to. But I don't stop at that one anymore. And every now and then, when I'm filling out mileage and flipping through those little notebooks, I land on that page with the smeared ink and the missing receipt, and I think about how a business like that keeps functioning if no one is willing to admit what happens there after midnight. If nobody was present and the building was locked, somebody still reset the pump, somebody let that phone ring inside, and somebody moved through that shack in the dark often enough to know exactly when to stay out of sight. Story 3. The last one is the one I still check over my shoulder for. And I know that sounds dramatic until I tell you the part with the car window. I was already outside when it happened. I just pushed through the store door with a bottle in one hand and my keys in the other, and I saw someone standing beside my car, not leaning on it, not messing with the handle, just standing directly next to the driver's side door, close enough that if I kept walking on the same line, I'd end up maybe 2 steps from them. The body was facing away from me. I know that part. I know it because I stopped dead when I saw the back of their jacket and the shape of their shoulders turned toward the pumps instead of the store. But in the reflection on my side window, the person was facing me. Not halfway. Not in motion. Fully facing me, like they'd been standing there waiting for me to come out. I don't know how to explain that without making it sound bigger or stranger than it looked. It wasn't some movie thing. It was just one of those seconds where your brain refuses the image because the image and the body do not match, and your stomach drops before you've even decided what you're seeing. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask if they needed help. I didn't go back inside. I changed direction just enough to come at the car wider, hit the unlock on my key fob before I was there, yanked the door open and got in so fast I slammed my own knee on the steering column. By the time I had the door locked, the bottle had rolled into the passenger footwell and my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the keys trying to start the engine. Then I left. I drove with my shoulders up by my ears for I don't know how long before I even let myself look in the mirror. To explain why I was that primed already, I have to back up a little. I hate driving alone at night. Not in a cute way. Not in a I'll do it anyway and complain the whole time way. I mean, I can do it. I do it. But from the second it gets dark, I'm aware of every exit I take, and every car that sits behind me too long, and every gas station that looks more closed than open. I'm not one of those people who says they love the freedom of late road trips. To me, it mostly feels like being visible in places where nobody would notice if something got weird. So I have habits. I keep my phone charged. I text when I leave and when I get in. And if I'm doing a longer drive by myself, especially through smaller towns, I share my live location with one of my friends, usually my friend Maya, because she's awake late and doesn't mind if I send her dumb updates like stopping for caffeine or taking the wrong exit because I missed a sign. That night I was driving back from seeing friends. Nothing dramatic, just later than I'd planned because we sat around longer than I meant to. And then I kept putting off leaving because I didn't want to do the long stretch home in the dark, which is dumb, because eventually you have to leave and all you've done is make it later. I was tired, not falling asleep tired, but that gross sticky-eyed tired where gas station lights start feeling way too bright and your back hurts from sitting. I needed to use the bathroom, and I wanted a drink that wasn't the warm water bottle in my cup holder, so when I came through a small town and saw a convenience store with pumps still lit, I pulled in. It wasn't fully dead. That's what sold me on it. Open sign on. Lights inside. One pickup at the far pump that looked empty. Small building attached fuel pumps. One of those places that sells lottery tickets, motor oil, and weird local jerky near the register. I texted Maya, stopping for a minute, and she just sent back a thumbs up. I left my location on like I always do. The parking lot was mostly dark except for the harsh white around the door and the canopy over the pumps. You could hear the hum from the soda coolers through the front glass before you even went in. I remember that because it felt weirdly loud when I opened the door. There was one employee behind the counter. No customers. He looked up the second I walked in, and before I even got both feet over the mat, he said, "You shouldn't stay long." Not mean. Not loud, just flat. My first thought was, oh, they're closing. So I said, "Sorry, I just need the bathroom and a drink." He didn't answer that. He just kept looking at me for this weird beat, then glanced past me toward the door and said, "Quiet." Okay. That was enough to make me half smile in that awkward customer way. Because I didn't know if he was warning me there were people outside or telling me not to hang around or what. He wasn't old, maybe early 30s, wearing the store polo and a dark hoodie underneath it. He looked tired more than anything else. I should have just left then. I know that, but when somebody says something odd in a store, most of the time the explanation is boring. They're closing. Their manager is on them. Somebody weird has been loitering. I didn't want to act like a frightened idiot because a cashier was bad at phrasing. So I went to the bathroom. Even in there I was aware of the place. The buzzing fluorescent light, too bright and making everything look greenish. The hand dryer that didn't work. The smell of old mop water and that fake citrus cleaner they use when they've been wiping the same surfaces for years. I washed my hands fast, checked my phone, still had signal, and there was a message from Maya that just said, "All good?" I typed, "Yeah, creepy clerk lol," and shoved the phone back in my pocket. When I came out, I went to the cooler at the back and grabbed an orange soda because I wanted caffeine but not enough to be awake until sunrise. My hands were cold from the glass door and from the bottle. I remember that detail because I kept switching it from one hand to the other while I stood there deciding if I also wanted chips. That was when I first noticed the person outside. Not clearly. Just someone near the pumps, off to the side of my car. The front windows were full of reflections from inside, so looking out wasn't clean. I saw a shape where I didn't think a shape had been a second earlier. I looked directly at it and it wasn't there in the same place. Maybe a step farther left. Maybe closer to the pump. I told myself I was looking through glare and decals and bright interior reflections, which I probably was. That kind of glass lies to you all the time at night. I carried the soda to the counter and set it down. The employee rang it up without small talk. He kept glancing past me toward the front door, then down at the register, then back up, but never really at me. Not for more than a second. I could feel it without seeing it directly. That sense that somebody is watching a point near your shoulder instead of your face. I said, "Are you closing?" He said, "No." Then after a pause, like he regretted saying even that much, he added, "Just don't take your time out there." I laughed a little because I wanted him to hear how normal I was being. I said, "Okay, now you're making it weird." He didn't laugh. He slid the soda toward me after I paid and for the first time looked me straight in the eye. Then he looked past me again toward the door and said, "Your phone buzzing." It was. I pulled it out and saw a message from Maya that said, "Why did you stop moving?" I actually frowned at it because I was literally walking around the store. Back bathroom, cooler, counter. I typed, "I'm inside getting a drink." 3 dots right away. Then, "No, your location's been sitting at the pumps." I looked down at the little map preview in the message thread and my stomach did that small fast flip. My blue dot was pinned out in the lot near my car, not drifting a little, not lagging by half the building, just sitting there. I told myself GPS drift, metal roof, small town signal, totally normal. But I became aware then of how long the employee had been looking toward that door. I turned just enough to see out the window again. There was definitely someone outside now, standing near my car, not moving. I couldn't make out anything useful, just dark clothes and the outline of a person under the canopy edge where the light dropped off. Every time I tried to focus, I caught my own reflection overlaid on them. My face floating over the door glass, the white of my shirt, the soda bottle in my hand. I asked the employee, "Do you know that guy?" He didn't answer for a second. Then he said, if you're leaving, leave. That's all. Not call somebody. Not wait here. Not I'll walk you out. Just leave. And that made it worse, honestly. Because now I had 3 possible explanations and none of them were good. Either he knew the person and didn't want involvement, or he didn't know them and had seen enough to be nervous. Or I was reading all of this wrong and turning some poor stranger pumping gas into a whole story. I stood there arguing with myself for maybe 5 seconds that felt longer. If I stayed inside, I was making myself a problem for this guy behind the counter who clearly wanted no part of any situation. If I called someone, what was I even reporting? A person standing outside? If I waited, I was just giving myself more time to imagine things. And underneath all of that was the old stupid fear I always have when I'm alone, which is that admitting you're scared sometimes makes you act more vulnerable than whatever scared you in the first place. So I said, okay, thanks, like a complete idiot, picked up the soda and headed out. The air outside felt colder than it had when I came in. Not because the temperature had changed, just because I was suddenly paying attention to all of it. The open lot, the hum from the canopy lights, the squeak of the store door closing behind me, my own footsteps sounding too loud on the concrete, and then the rough asphalt. My car was maybe 30 feet away. The person was beside the driver's side. Still, I slowed without meaning to. They were facing away from me. I could see that clearly now. Dark jacket, hood down, hands at their sides, not looking into the store, not touching my car, just standing close enough that if I'd hit unlock from farther away they would have heard the click. I remember thinking, say something. Ask if they're okay. Ask if they need you to move. Do something normal. Then I saw the reflection. In the side window, in that dim warped mirror of dark glass and canopy light, the same figure was facing me, head turned toward me, body square. I stopped so hard my shoes made that little rubber chirp on the pavement. I looked from the actual person to the reflection and back again. The actual body had not turned. I swear it hadn't. The shoulders were still angled away. The stance was the same. But the face in the glass, I couldn't even make out the features, was directed straight at me. Every hair on my arms went up at once. There are explanations for weird reflections. I know that. Angles, double panes, light from the store behind me catching something I didn't clock. Another person reflected from somewhere else. Fine, maybe. But none of those thoughts arrived before my body did what it did. I hit the unlock button while I was still a few steps away. The lights flashed. The person beside the car didn't react, which somehow made it worse. I came in wide, around the rear corner, opened the driver's door, and got inside in one movement so messy I banged the bottle, my knee, and the edge of the door all at once. By the time I looked up from the steering wheel, the space beside the car was empty. Not running away empty. Not halfway to the pump. Just not there. I started the car and pulled out hard enough that one of the tires spit gravel. I didn't look for them again. I didn't look toward the store. I didn't look to see if the employee was watching. I just drove. Maya called me maybe 2 minutes later, and I answered on speaker because my hands were not steady enough to hold the phone right. She said, "Are you okay? What happened?" And I heard how thin my own voice sounded when I said, "I don't know." I told her enough to make sense. Creepy store. Guy outside. Weird reflection. Leaving now. She stayed on the phone with me until I got to a bigger highway and then all the way to a 24-hour place with actual traffic and bright lights and too many people walking in and out. I parked right by the front windows and sat there with the engine running while she kept talking to me about completely random stuff. Work drama, some show she was watching, just to flatten me back out. When I finally got home, she sent me screenshots from the location app. That's the part I still have saved. My location had shown me at the pumps the whole time I was inside the store, not jumping all over the lot, not delayed by a minute, fixed, still. Like I'd parked myself beside the driver's door and never moved, and I know. Location apps glitch, signal drifts, buildings interfere, maps get weird, all true. I'm not saying it means something impossible happened. What got under my skin was how it lined up with everything else. The employee seeing I shouldn't stay long before I even said anything. Him watching the door instead of me. The shape outside seeming to be in a different place every time I glanced toward the glass. Maya asking why I'd stopped moving while I was literally walking around inside holding a cold bottle and checking out at the register. A couple days later, in the safety of daylight and coffee and my own bed, I tried to make the whole thing smaller in my head. Maybe the employee knew there was some local guy hanging around the pumps bothering people. Maybe the reflection was just bad angle and tinted glass. Maybe the location pin froze because my app was lagging in a dead zone and Maya happened to check at the wrong moment. Honestly, that's probably some version of it, but I keep getting caught on one detail. If the person outside never visibly turned toward me, then maybe the window lied. Maybe the light bent. Maybe I panicked and saw what I expected to see. What I still can't file anywhere is why, on the screenshot Maya sent me, my little blue dot stayed beside the driver's door the whole time I was inside that store, like something out there had decided that was where I was.